Good evening. My name is Stacy Dykstra, and I'm the CEO at the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma. Welcome to those of you here in person and also those of you joining us virtually. We are so excited to have you with us tonight for our town hall on hunger with our special guest, Congressman Frank Lucas. For those of you that are here in person, our very own Hope's Kitchen made some refreshments. So if you haven't already gotten some, please get some refreshments during the town hall. They are very yummy. I also wanted to let you know that the reason why we're having this town hall is to talk about the Farm Bill, because it's a really important vehicle for us that provides funding for our federal nutrition programs. And that reauthorization is going to come up in 2023. But we're already getting started talking about the Farm Bill and thinking about what the best way is to make sure it can support us and support those Oklahomans that are facing food insecurity. And you all know that Oklahoma is one of the hungriest states, so it's very important that we are very in tune with this and making good decisions about it. We envision at the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma an Oklahoma where no one goes hungry, and that means all of these things have to be in place to make sure we're supporting our neighbors in need. The Farm Bill is that tool that will help us not only fight hunger today, but really can help us prevent hunger in the future. So I also wanted to say just a special thank you to Congressman Lucas, because if you don't know, he is a great champion of hunger prevention and just making sure there is equitable access to food for people that are facing hunger. So thank you so much. Appreciate you. I'm going to quickly explain how the night's going to go. First, we're going to hear from Jeremy Humphers, who is the Regional Food Bank's board chair, and he's going to introduce Congressman Lucas to us. And then Congressman Lucas will share a little bit from us about all of his experience with the Farm Bill, its history, and also just how important it is for Oklahoma. Then we'll have a panelist session, and the panelists, there'll be 4 of them, and we'll introduce them individually when that time comes, but they're going to talk about federal nutrition programs, COVID-19 and the impact of that, and all of its importance in Oklahoma. And then finally, we'll welcome questions from you all about the Farm Bill or anything that anyone talked about tonight. We do have cards, I believe, note cards that you can write those on, and Lauren is here with us, and she's standing in the back of the room, and she can collect those if you want to just kind of hold them up. If you decide to write a question, she'll collect those for you and make sure that we get those answered. And online, I think you can just put those in the chat, and we'll make sure just anything that's related to the Farm Bill, we'll make sure we get answered tonight for you. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Jeremy Humphers, our board chair, to introduce Congressman Lucas.
Thank you. Make sure you save some of that applause for the real distinguished guests. So listen to that lineup. You know, I was thinking a little bit about when you go someplace and you order a sandwich, maybe a sandwich basket, and that's what you really want, but they give you that pickle as well. I'm kind of the pickle here tonight. You know, you didn't ask for it, but I'm here to do something and to contribute as best I can. Well, it's really my pleasure to introduce Congressman Frank Lucas. Congressman Lucas is a 5th-generation Oklahoman, and his family has farmed and lived in Oklahoma for more than a century, and that's something to be proud of, I think. He's a proud graduate of Oklahoma State University. He graduated from there in 1982 with a degree in agricultural economics. Applause is welcome, of course. Yeah, the more we can do that tonight, the better. Well, after graduating, our congressman was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in a special election in 1994, and he's really done incredible work since then. In fact, he's been a crusader for the American farmer. He's been a defender of Oklahoma's values and done many wonderful things with a number of illustrious accomplishments. In 2014, as the chairman of the House Committee on Agriculture, he led the debate and, working with a great number of Oklahomans, successfully passed the Farm Bill, the 2014 Farm Bill. And that was a monumental bill for Americans and even Oklahomans as well. Well, Congressman Lucas currently serves as the ranking member on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and he's the longest-serving Republican on the House Committee on Financial Services. So please join me in welcoming Congressman Lucas.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate the introduction, and I would note for the record that my dear bride, Linda Lucas, refers to herself as a rancher. I think of myself as a farmer. It's a small distinction between the two, but someday if you encounter Linda Lucas, ask her about her latest crop of replacement bulls. She will launch you into a discussion like you've never heard. That said, I appreciate the opportunity to come and visit about Farm Bill policy and the comprehensive nature of it and why it matters to all Americans. When I joined Congress in 1994, I had a degree in agricultural economics, farmer by trade. I represented the old 6th District, which was South Oklahoma City, downtown Oklahoma City, the Northeast Side, and 23 counties in Northwest Oklahoma. My 23 counties in far Northwest Oklahoma had been the armpit and the abyss of the Great Depression and the drought of the 1930s. Think of Mr. Steinbeck's book and all the struggles and strains that generation went through. So the people who raised me, my parents both started school in 1937 in Roger Mills County, a tough time, and all my grandparents, of course, were young men and women. And I came to Congress with the perspective that it was important that we not ignore the challenges, that we work to overcome those. And farm bill policy, is one of those amazing documents that's evolved over time that addresses many needs. And if you'll bear with me, I'll take a one-semester class and shove it into the remaining 12 minutes as best I can. Until 1933, we had never, on the federal level, had comprehensive farm bill policy. We passed the Morrill Act, my predecessors did in 1862, signed by Mr. Lincoln, setting up the land-grant university system. First time in the history of the world, if you're willing to work hard enough, and if you were smart enough, you could secure a university education without being wealthy or from some elite family. An amazing change. And along came the Ag Research Service and the Extension Service to develop knowledge and to disseminate it. But until the Great Depression, we never had a comprehensive policy directed towards the raising of the food and fiber we need. And the Depression was so bad, and the drought of the 30s was so bad, that Congress was compelled to pass the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. The first of several farm bills. That farm bill was essentially about raising food, and it was a supply management bill. Quotas and allotments. How do you make sure that farmers had the ability to make a living? And there was a little side note to the supply management programs from the 30s until the 1990s. It meant the federal government was buying up surplus, quote, surplus agricultural products. That's where we began our real feeding programs in this country, was from the warehouses full of beans and powdered eggs and cheese and all of those things. Now, by the time we arrived in the 1960s, the constituency that was primarily focused on production agriculture had shrunk in proportion to the rest of the country. And the Kennedy administration in 1962 came up with this concept that ultimately the Johnson administration, a few years later, would turn into what we referred to then as the food stamp program. The goal of making sure those of our fellow citizens who didn't have enough to eat, didn't have enough calories, would have the ability to secure that food. And the food stamp program, which my predecessors in Congress reached out and enthusiastically incorporated in the Farm Bill, because the logic was, if we're going to raise the food, then we need to make sure there's the ability to consume the food. A balancing act. And that worked wonderfully until the 1990s. And at that point, the base of farmers and the base of folks who were in more urban areas focused on food stamps was no longer the majority of Congress. And when I chaired the Subcommittee on Conservation, Rural Development, and Ag Research in 2002, we put a third leg under that stool: nutrition, production, conservation. And then we get to 2012, when I became chairman of the committee. Even that program was not sustainable over the long haul. So in 2014, actually starting in 2012, we wrote the third generation Farm Bill, what we're working under now. The the concept of being able to raise the food and fiber we need, the concept of having infrastructure support, research and rural development, farm credit, all of those things, but also a strong and vibrant nutrition title. Not just SNAP, because that's critically important. But in doing the Farm Bill, I needed to be able to bring my Republican colleagues along who were a little hesitant. And those of you who were involved in those days know I enthusiastically embraced the food bank effort. We put as much TFAP money, the administrative money, as we could possibly put in the bill. I remember sitting down with senior policy people on my committee as chairman, and I said, let's provide all the resources they can possibly use. Let's not waste a penny, not a penny, but let's provide the resources they can possibly use. And that was a turbocharging of the effort. And that was maintained in the 2014 Farm Bill. And now I believe it'll be maintained in the 2023 Farm Bill. So what's my brief synopsis here before we get to the really important stuff, the panel discussion, the questions? We have an obligation in this country as a matter of national security to be able to feed ourselves. That's what the production side of the Farm Bill is all about. But we also have a moral and national security interest in making sure our fellow citizens have the food resources they need. You can't learn if you don't have enough food. You can't work if you don't have enough food. That balancing act is where we go forward in the future. I love the food bank movement. I love being able to point out the public-private partnership, corporate America, volunteers, enthusiastic people. It's been a rough march getting here, and I will tell you, the 14th Farm Bill took me 2 different tries across the floor of the United States House, and I learned patience beyond measure in that process. And if you'll ask me the right question, I'll tell you how close I came to getting somebody's attention on the floor during the Farm Bill process. But with that, thank you for being involved as you are. Thank you for helping generate events to get attention on why this is important so we can build the coalition of votes again to pass the next comprehensive Farm Bill, to address everyone's needs, to move the country forward. No one should suffer as my constituents did in the 1930s from rickets and scurvy and all the malnutrition diseases. No one. And together, I think, we'll continue to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, thank you all, and I look forward to the rest of this evening.
We're now going to move to our next section of the night and talk about a lot of different topics, but basically TFAP, a little bit more about the Farm Bill, COVID-19 and modernizing that Farm Bill, and then how SNAP helps grocers and economies. And we're going to hear from some panelists who are experiencing these things firsthand, which is always such a delight. So thank you, Congressman Lucas, for kind of setting the stage for us. I'd like to introduce each of our 4 panelists first, and then we'll invite 2 of them to come up and join Congressman Lucas for the first part of the conversation. So the first person I'd love to introduce is Ginger Tucker, and she's going to talk to us about TFAP. Ginger Tucker is the co-founder and director of the Temple Area Food Pantry. Temple Area Food Pantry serves all of Cotton County. Temple Area Food Pantry was first started as an FFA community service project by Ginger's daughter, Ashley, who actually happens to be here too with us. Ginger is the mom of 3 sons and 1 daughter. She has 14 grandchildren. I can't think of anything more fun than that, who are the smartest, best-looking, and greatest kids ever born. Ginger is also the support group leader for Oklahoma for the Transverse Myelitis Association, SRNA, an organization for people who have a rare spinal cord disease. In her spare time, Ginger enjoys reading, quilting, sewing, and embroidery. Thank you, Ginger, for being here. The next person I'd like to introduce is James Rawson. James has served as the Executive Director for the Food and Resource Center of South Central Oklahoma for 5 years. His Food and Resource Center serves 1,400 families every month who are facing food insecurity through the TFAP program. Prior to, he served as Campus Director of the Baptist Village Communities for 17 years. This is truly a gentleman of service. James, thank you for being here with us today. Our third guest is Jim Strube, and he's going to talk about lessons learned through the pandemic and suggestions for how we can use the Farm Bill in ways that really help us prevent hunger. Jim Strube serves as the Chief Impact Officer for the Regional Food Bank, with oversight responsibility for the programs that directly serve neighbors, with everything from childhood feeding programs to health-related initiatives in all 53 of the counties that we serve. Prior to his time at the Regional Food Bank, he worked at the Oklahoma Department of Human Services from 1977 to 2017. When he left DHS, he was the Director of Adult and Family Services, where staff provided access to programs like TANF and SNAP across the state. So he was the reigning expert before he arrived, and he continues to be the reigning expert here for us. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jenna Good to you. She's going to talk to us about SNAP. Jenna Good is a third-generation grocer in rural southwest Oklahoma. She is the Vice President of Retail Operations for Shelton's Grocery in Waurika, Oklahoma, and Walter's Hometown Grocery in Walters, Oklahoma, as well as the owner of the Grocery Gal blog. But her favorite job or best accomplishment
they're not a failure because they had to come to us. They just hit some bumps, and we're here to help through that. We opened in September 2016, and since that time we have been visited over 95,000 times. That's not a number to celebrate. That's the need that we see in our area. We serve about 1,400 families a month, and it's growing. We have anywhere from 10 to 15% new applications every day. So we're growing leaps and bounds as groceries and inflation just eats into budgets. We have grocery store style shopping. So instead of getting a box, you come into our grocery store, which we try to keep very neat and clean and organized, to make that shopping experience what it would be in any big box grocery store. They come in, and based on their family size, they choose the food they want, which is so important. It's nice to have the choice. We're supported strictly by foundations, businesses, community organizations, churches, and individual donations. We don't charge for anything, any service we provide. So everything has to be funded through donations. Talking about pandemic impacts, obviously the worst was going from our guest choice shopping to pre-filled carts. The one thing that really inspired me when I went to volunteer before I was hired was that I assumed a food pantry, you hand out boxes. Found out that there was a grocery store, and that just thrilled me. And I told my wife, I'm going to interview hard for this. I think this is the way it's supposed to be done. And I was thrilled to get to be the director of the Food and Resource Center. But we took that choice away, unfortunately, during the pandemic. We also saw a lot of fear, a lot of scared people, not only about the pandemic, but is our food supply going to get cut off? That was a real fear, and some folks acted out over that because they were scared. Fortunately, we were able to reassure them throughout the pandemic. Our food supply is secure, it's safe, you're going to get a lot of food, and we were thankful for that. We closed 2 days during the pandemic, and that was contact tracing, basically. So we were thankful that we were able to serve throughout. We actually had, in our area, lower numbers due to the Farmers to Families food program, and we had an organization in Armour giving out thousands of those boxes each week, which was wonderful. I told people we didn't care where they got the food as long as they got the food, and so we were very, very excited about that. But that's what we saw during the pandemic. The main thing was the uncertainty. But fortunately, we're on the other side of that now, and we're thankful. Does it matter what we do? Does it really matter? We have a lady that comes in every month. She's an older lady, very wonderful, very sweet. But if she finds me, she runs over to me as best she can and gives me a big old hug and just says, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do each month. I couldn't make it to the end of the month without the food you provide. And so I always look for my hug every month. I try to catch her when she's in. Does it matter for the kids? We had a lady and son shopping, and when we got to the end and she brought her cart back to check in, we handed the boy a bag of Chips Ahoy. After his chin, he pulled it off the ground, he broke into the biggest smile, and he said, wow, we hadn't had cookies in a long time. We can't afford cookies. Stuff we take for granted. And then we had a lady shop. It was her first time. She went through the store. Again, she came in expecting a box. But she came into the store, and she picked up her groceries. And as she was walking out to her car, she took a good look at her basket and absolutely burst into tears. And she not only didn't have to pay for that amount of groceries, but she also got to choose that food. So important. And we were thrilled to be able to help. And so is the USDA TFAP program an important program for us? Absolutely. Commodities literally are our lifeblood. Staples we get such as butter, milk, eggs, cheese, canned goods, canned soups, and wonderful proteins. You'd be glad to shop in our store, I promise you, all the wonderful stuff we get from the TFAP program. It is so important for us that we get that. We couldn't adjust our food budget to be able to handle the food without the TFAP. So the bottom line, it's absolutely necessary for pantries like the Food and Resource Center of South Central Oklahoma that Congress maintains and strengthens our investment in USDA commodities and the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program, as well as our storage and distribution capacities. Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting me here today. I appreciate it very, very much. Can you hear me okay? It's all right. I brought a display board because I personally learn better by looking and seeing something that I can remember easier than I can somebody's words. I invite you to look at this when you have a minute. I did this so that you all could see the price differences between the processed foods and the fresh foods. I agree with my friend here said. The TFAP is very, very needed. Temple Area Food Pantry opened in 2008. It began as my daughter's community service project for FFA. When we saw how very much food assistance was needed in our community, I contacted the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma and began the process to become a partner agency. In that beginning, we served 25 families a month. In 2011, we had outgrown the little Sunday school room, and I contacted some city officials there in Temple and signed a contract with them for us to use a manufacturing building that was empty, and we moved the pantry to there. Almost immediately, we saw an increase up to 125 families a month. It was very overwhelming. At the height of the pandemic, we served 165 families on our Saturday distribution days. When the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma sends fresh produce on our trucks, we get a truck twice a month. We give those away the very same day. We call it a sidewalk giveaway, a bonus day, and it doesn't matter how much they bring us, we give it away. At the beginning of the pandemic, in the spring, they sent my regular grocery order I had, but they sent a huge tractor trailer rig full of produce. That's a lot of food. That's a lot. We gave it away the same day. Now, my trucks arrive around 10 in the morning, and we were there till 8 at night. One of my staff members said, as we were cleaning up, he said, "Well, I guess we can have lunch now." The fresh produce is so needed. I cannot begin to tell you. I too have had clients that have told me things like your cookie story. I'm thinking of a child right now that once told me that we were her favorite grocery store. And I thought, okay, I'm glad you view us as a store. Why are we your favorite grocery store? And she said, because Mama doesn't say no here. The mama has to say no in the regular grocery store because she's trying to stick to her budget. Our community, Temple, is in a food desert. Our county is 642 square miles. We have one grocery store. We have 3 towns, one grocery store. When we gave away fresh milk recently, I had a little mama thank me over and over. She said she was out of milk at her house and had been for several days. Gas at that time was $4.35 a gallon. She was trying to figure out if she would use the gas in her car and drive the 20 minutes to go buy a gallon of milk at the grocery store, or if she would go to the one convenience store in our town and spend $7.29 on a gallon of milk. She has a house full of kids, and that's a dilemma. I can't even imagine how that was for her. And then she gets a free gallon of milk. Yeah, she was pretty happy. And I can assure you, not one drop of that milk went to waste. Of the households with children, nearly all have at least 2 adults who work. Some of our families have a grandparent or even 2 living in the same house. And so it might be that mom and dad both work and the grandma is taking care of the children, or it could be that one of the parents is unable to work or is staying home with the children, and grandma or grandpa and the other parent is working. Of all of my single-parent households with young children, all of those parents have a job. Many of these same families qualify for the SNAP benefits and do receive those. It is simply not true to assume that food pantry clients are lazy. They're doing the best they can. There aren't a lot of jobs in rural areas in Oklahoma. The number one food that impoverished children do not get is fresh fruit. The days we receive a truck delivery, we have what we call a bonus day or a sidewalk giveaway. We give away all the fresh products, like I said earlier, that same day. We usually have 2 bonus days per month, and on those days, we serve anywhere from 75 to 125 families. These numbers, plus our big Saturday distribution days, can easily reach close to 375 to 400 families. Temple has less than 1,000 people in it, but we do serve the entire county. We have had children who have never seen a fresh peach or a nectarine. One little boy demanded to know why that one food he was looking at was fuzzy. He had never seen a fresh peach. And so we had to explain to him how God made the peaches. We have had children look at plums and wonder if they were large grapes. The reason that the impoverished children don't get to have fresh fruit is the cost. As you can see on my board, the processed foods are so much cheaper. A bag of grapes is over $7. A peach is $1 or more per peach. Nectarines, nearly $1 a piece. A bag of apples can be anywhere from $4.50 to $6. My clients are doing their best to provide good, healthy food for their children. They need help in getting the fresh products especially. Congressman Lucas, when you work on the farm bill, please remember the children. Please remember those that need us to help them the most. Every child deserves fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. And thank you for what you do for us as a country. Thank you.
Let me simply say, I appreciate the real world examples of why the efforts here matter. And I have been through many hearings down through the years on the House Agriculture Committee, and you reinforced the things that we've discussed, the things that we've discovered. But you bring not only a human touch to it, but the challenges of the last 2.5 years, how extraordinarily hard that's been. The food supply was alluded to. We have in this nation a very efficient, just-in-time process of taking food from the farm to the consumer's table. And when COVID hit, and the employees at the processing plants and the packing plants and the trucking facilities, and yes, the retail and distributor facilities started going down, it turned us upside down. And even things as simple as the way we package our food. Prior to COVID, you'd be surprised the percentage of food in this country as a whole that was packaged in quantities and in volumes designed for restaurant consumption. And when the restaurants had to close down, how do you break down a 100-pound pack of hamburger once it's been frozen? How do you do these things? Because we have very, as our retail friends will stress in a little bit, very methodical health laws in this country and standards. And we had an imbalance of product, and we had a shortage of raw product through the processing, and it put a real strain on everyone, your guests, my constituents, all across the country. I would like to think, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but I'd like to think we've learned to value the people who are a part of the food chain from the field till it comes into our hands here. But you never stop learning. You never stop learning. I alluded in my earlier comments about the nature of my home community. I'm always particularly sensitive about these issues because before the Great Depression and the drought of the 30s, there were 14,000 people living in my home county of Roger Mills. With this census, we made it back to 3,500. We had an out-migration of 10,000 plus people in the 30s and 40s. They starved out. Now, I'll say this respectfully to any Californian sitting in the room. Do you remember what Will Rogers said in the 1930s about that great migration of Okies from Oklahoma to California? He said it was the most amazing thing. It was the only time in history where a migration like that had raised the IQ in both places. Now, Will was a comedian, but the challenges are real. The challenges are real. And thank you all.
James and Ginger, thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, you guys want to?
I guess I'm up. Okay. My name's Jim Struby, and I wanted to give you some background on, as soon as I get the right notes up, this is the first time I've used my phone before, and of course, okay, here we go.
Phones, children, and computers never perform in public.
I know, and I should have practiced, I guess. Okay, here we go. It's sure better be worth the wait, I'll tell you. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to tell you that the Regional Food Bank has 53 counties that we're responsible for. That's a big bite of Oklahoma. There are more than 500,000 Oklahomans that are hungry. And so food banks are very important, but we couldn't do it without the USDA and the programs that we've been talking about already. In fact, SNAP actually feeds 9 times more people than the food bank does. So that shows you how important that program is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that program. But first, I want to talk about how the USDA helped us during the pandemic. We couldn't have actually done all the things that you heard earlier without the help of the USDA. And they changed a lot of the rules in order to make it easier for us to feed people with the product they provided. They were instrumental in the extra demand that you've heard talked about here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what they actually changed, because it would be great if this was incorporated into the Farm Bill. So one was non-congregate feeding, and that's a rather technical term, but basically the feeding programs that USDA had created required people to be on site in order to get fed. And if they weren't on site, they couldn't participate in the program. So during COVID, it was understood that we couldn't have great groups of people congregate. So they removed that restriction. And what we found with that was not only did it help people stay safe, but it also made it easier for people to take advantage of the program. And so we actually had more people take advantage of the program because of that waiver. And we think that would help now. that would actually get more people involved in the feeding programs that exist. Then also, and this is even more technical, there was what's called an at-risk after-school area eligibility. That's a rule that exists for the childhood feeding programs aimed at students. And the FNS had allowed schools and after-school care centers to serve at-risk after-school programs and snacks to children regardless of their location. So what that means is those programs are really limited to the kids that live in a particular location. That was removed during the pandemic. That also made it much easier for us to feed more kids. I also want to talk a little bit about SNAP. One of the suggestions that I would like to offer up for the Farm Bill again is that the summer EBT program be expanded to all states. Right now, there's a small group of states that are allowed to take advantage of that. And that may not have to actually be in the Farm Bill. It may be a USDA decision, but it's something where many of the states that could take advantage of that are not. Then I want to talk about a couple ideas. One is really coming from my experience at the Department of Human Services. So I worked there for 40 years, and I worked with the SNAP program that entire time to some degree or another. And what we saw and I think almost anybody would have heard this at this point in time, but a lot of our clients would lose their SNAP benefits because their boss gave them a raise. And it happens every day. And so that's called the cliff effect when somebody gets to that point where they're dropped. There are ideas about how to end the cliff effect, and the one that really struck me was to go ahead and do what is already happening in the TANF program with Medicaid, which is that if you're a TANF recipient and you get a job and you're able to leave the TANF assistance program, you still get Medicaid for an additional 90 days. And that allows for an adjustment period when it comes to one of the most expensive things that people have to pay for, which is medical care. So what I'm proposing is that we have something similar for the SNAP program, that people get a SNAP for an additional 3 months after they've gotten an increase in their income. That could be graduated so that they slowly lose their benefits over the 90 days, let's say. But I really would love to see that. That was a real frustration for me when I was at the Department of Human Services. And then finally, this seems like an easy thing to do, but it's probably a lot more complicated than I imagined. But everybody now has an opportunity to apply for benefits on the internet. In fact, that's the primary way that the Department of Human Services and most of the human service organizations in the United States take applications for the SNAP program and many of the other programs. And if we had a deduction or incorporated in the standard utility allowance, which is kind of a deduction, if we had the price of internet, either the service itself or some measure, some part of the service, I think that would really be beneficial. And it's going to be critical, frankly, because there are not that many opportunities to apply in person. The state of Oklahoma has rearranged their staff in a way that they don't have as many county offices as they have. They're embedded in communities, so I don't want to be critical because it's really a great idea to just be out in the world with everybody. But it also puts people in a position of not knowing where to get help, and they usually end up going to the internet, which is why it's there. I was frankly part of the people that set that up in the first place at our DHS. But it's becoming the way of life for most people, and believe it or not, most people who are even living in poverty have access to smartphones, and so they use those for the internet. But those costs are prohibitive, and I think this is a way to open up the program even more. And with the 500,000 people in Oklahoma that need this help, we still have not gotten everybody who's eligible for SNAP on SNAP. So there are barriers to that, and these are just some suggestions to help with that. And I'll sit down now.
Have all my notes. I'm Jenna Good. I cover the same area that Ginger has previously talked about, so I think she gave you a good run through of what our communities look like. I'm a third-generation grocer. If any of you have ever worked with your family, you know how fun that is some days. I work with my mom and dad daily, and used to enjoy getting to work with my grandfather, who was kind of the one that started it all for us. He managed a grocery store in Temple, Oklahoma, from the late, I think, 1968 till he retired in 1995. And then a couple years later, my dad decided to drag my mother along into the grocery business, and I was 8 years old when we purchased our first store. Since then, I have grown up in the grocery store. I was there before that, but it really changed for me. I went from spending summer vacation with all of my friends to living in a grocery store from open till close. We were joking about it not long ago with Labor Day. I was in college before I had ever spent a holiday not working in the grocery store. And I spent all day feeling terribly guilty that I was enjoying a barbecue and my mother and my father were working there. So for me, food has been really essential in my family's life. My parents and I, we have grocery stores. My brother and sister-in-law own a state-inspected food processing plant, so they are essential too. We just talk about food in our family. So that's a little bit of history and background with me. I've been asked what it takes to run a grocery store, and I do everything from ordering, computer work in the back, price changes weekly, and I run a cash register. It's often a joke that I should hang my diploma on it because it's probably one of my favorite jobs. For me, my very favorite part of the job is the people. Growing up in the stores when I was 8 and 9 years old, all of my best friends were 65 and older. And so I have experienced a completely different friendship than most. My son is 10 years old, and he works in the grocery stores with us, and all of his best friends are 65 and older too. He loves the stores, and he's often with me in things like this. The only reason I didn't bring him is I'm a third-generation grocer, but hopefully I'm raising the fourth, but I would never want to put pressure on him and, put that burden on him at such a young age, but we're hoping for the best. He was with us during the pandemic whenever Mom went from working, my nice 7-hour days, because it's family, I get to take him to school and pick him up. I'm very fortunate, to staying with me and working 17-hour days in the grocery store overnight. We spent many nights sleeping in the office because we might expect a freight truck at 1 a.m. The supply chain was so crazy. We didn't know when things were going to come in, if we would have food the next day, and it might be 3 or 4 days before our next shipment came. So for us in our small community, we're in a food desert. It's 20 minutes to Lawton, which is kind of the next largest place where there's a Walmart. But other than that, we're the only one in Cotton County. Just recently, Dollar Generals have expanded into a little more grocery offerings, but for us, we've been the only one the whole time that we've been there. In Jefferson County, which is where our second store is, we're one of 2, and the second store is for sale and faces closing. It's in Ringling, Oklahoma. So I have grown up in a food desert, not quite knowing what that meant, but as I've gotten older, and through the pandemic, I think I saw it more, it is so essential for people to have access to all of the food offerings. Not just something that you can run in and grab cereal for your kid in the morning for a quick breakfast, but for fresh fruits and vegetables and for fresh meat, for quality offerings, not just something that you can run in and grab really quickly just to fill a belly. So I think for me, essential, whether it be food offerings or whether it's services, The grocery industry, and especially the independent grocery industry, is vital for rural Oklahoma. You don't see many big box corporations opening stores in small rural communities. If they do, they don't last long. And unfortunately, a lot of times when that happens, you see the remaining businesses in your areas go out with it. Because it's a hard business, as are most rural businesses, because you see your communities are leaving and not quite staying. So when people are thinking about what they need to survive in a small rural community, which are essential in your farming communities and everything else, a grocery store is essential, as are convenience that offer groceries or dollar stores with expanded grocery. So I think for me in the Farm Bill, one of the most important things is evening the playing field for independent grocery or store offerings to keep up with big box entities, because there's just not the same funding for us to be able to make it an even playing field with like technology updates. Mobile SNAP offering is something that is coming up, and it's mentioned in the Farm Bill, and I think it's a pilot that should remain like permanent within the Farm Bill. Because it does give people with SNAP more access, more offerings, but I think that there needs to be more offering for independents to be able to take advantage of being able to offer that technology. Technology costs are probably one of the highest things for independent grocers to keep up with. Just this summer, we had to update computers recently for PCI compliance with your chip readers, and that was a $32,000 cost between two stores. Most independent entities cannot afford that on a daily basis, and not all of them are offered on like payment plans or anything, so that's just a cost that immediately comes out, and that's so you can just accept to take a debit card. And there are a lot of small independent stores that are single owner stores or single stores that they just simply can't afford it. They either have to choose whether they have payroll and staff, or if they can take a debit or credit card. And you see a lot of those businesses turning to cash only. For every SNAP dollar spent in your rural community, you can expect about $1.40 in economic activity, which is great. So it would be wonderful if you could continue to grow your other offerings in your communities, and it means that being able to offer food readily is extra important. Sorry. One last thing that I would like to talk about are extra SNAP incentives like Double Up Oklahoma, which is something that I've been very excited about. Up until recently, Double Up programs were only offered in 4 states, and we see it expanding rapidly. What Double Up Oklahoma is a dollar matching program up to $20 on fresh produce purchases. Right now in the state of Oklahoma, it's offered through a variety of stores. In grocery stores, it's mainly United's and Homelands that are offering it right now. But you also see it's pretty special because you can use Double Up Oklahoma in farmers markets as well. So all of the dollar-to-dollar matching that you earn, if you take it to spend at a farmer's market, not only can you buy your fresh food with it, you can also purchase plants to grow your own, which I think is a super innovative part of that program. But I would love to see it be able to be implemented more in independent grocery, because right now we're only seeing it in large corporations with large numbers of stores like Homeland and United, which are great stores and they're offered in a lot of rural communities, but the independents, I think, lose out on that. Other than that, I think that that's all I have. I want to say thank you to Ginger. I know her work well, and their food pantry is very vital in our community, and I know our customers appreciate your services as well. Thank you.
Join me in thanking our panelists. Can they go up? Okay.
One of the amazing things, and you noted the title of this event being a town hall meeting, you've now seen an example, and will continue as we get into the rest of it, about the nature of town hall meetings. I always say that sometimes people speak to me, Sometimes they speak through me. This panel was very polite in speaking to me, but speaking also through me about the things that need to be addressed in the coming Farm Bill process. And I very much respect and appreciate that. My grandfather believed that farming in rural western Oklahoma was a good way to have a complicated life. So from 1922 to 1972, they were grocers. And I was raised as a kid in the environment you're talking about. And it is an exceptional experience because a small community grocer knows everyone, knows everything about everyone, and as my late grandmother said, had to keep her mouth closed for 50 years as a retail person. It might be worth noting that the process that we will go through to craft and create the next Farm Bill will be the legislative process. And sometimes if you watch late night political television, it doesn't matter who you watch, you get the impression that things either come from the White House or the leadership in the House or the leadership in the Senate. Occasionally that does happen. But farm bills have historically, in my time, and I think all the way back to 1933, have represented the traditional legislative process. So when we're discussing things that could be or should be or desperately need to be changed, that's the kind of stuff we incorporate. Come January, we'll begin an exhaustive series, January 23, of hearings at the subcommittee level, looking at every facet of the Farm Bill, nutrition, production, crop insurance, research, everything. And from that process in the spring will come a series of full committee hearings in early summer, going over the information brought up by the subcommittees. Again, exhaustively looking at everything. And from there, then, a bill will be introduced to start the actual drafting process. I would predict it will be the 18 Farm Bill, which will then be opened up to alteration and potential change. We'll go through markups at subcommittee, and they'll offer their sections of work product for the full committee, and we'll go through that process in the House. At the same time, this will be occurring in the United States Senate. And once we've secured the final draft in each of the bodies, then we will wind up in something called a conference committee to work out our differences. This is the textbook, the civics class version of how it's done. It doesn't always happen everywhere, but in the Ag Committee, especially in the Farm Bill process, we work through this process in the most traditional sense. That's how ultimately, in the fall, we will wind up with a final product that has not been agreed to by everyone, perhaps, but it will have achieved a consensus of the majority of the members of the House and the Senate, and we'll pass that final conference report and send it to the President. This is different, again, I note, than most legislation, but this is how you get a good work product. I'm an old school legislator. I've spent time trying to explain to my colleagues, if you'll do it the slow, complicated, methodical way that Jefferson's rule manuals suggest legislatively, then we'll get to where we need to be in a way that's really productive. But it takes patience. I didn't have this color hair when I started the 14 Farm Bill. I didn't take hypertension medicine. My wife didn't tell me to drive very slowly home from the airport every weekend to decompress before I got home. But it's the way to do things. So your input matters greatly. And it's not just Frank Lucas, but Tom Cole and all of my colleagues and all of our U.S. Senate friends, making sure the 435 House members and the 100 senators understand why these issues are important. Because if we work hard and we do it correctly, then we'll have another good Farm Bill, and people will benefit from it all across the country. The glass, my friends, is always half full. It's never half empty. We just need to fill the rest of it up, and we'll do that in this legislative process. And I appreciate my fellow panelists for their observations.
Okay, are you ready to take a few questions? We have a few questions that were submitted in advance, but if you have questions you would like to add, we'll get through as many as we can. Lauren, if you'll wave your hand. Lauren has some extra note cards, I believe, and some pens, and so if you need a note card or pen, let her know, and she'll get that to you. If you're ready with your note card, feel free to raise your hand, and she'll pick it up and bring it up to me, and we'll get through as many as we
I'm a
can.
great believer in this part of town meetings, but I always announce that when I begin, I pay my taxes on time and I'm married to the same person. And then we can move forward.
Okay, so our first question tonight comes from Daniel Matthews of our community market of Potawatomi County. The supply of USDA commodities for food insecure Oklahomans is significantly down. What does the Farm Bill do to address this urgent need for the most vulnerable populations?
We make resources available through the TFAP part of the program that food banks use. The challenge in the last 2.5 years has been with COVID and the disruption in production and processing and distribution. In many occasions, there's simply not been the product there to secure. I would like to think that as we get back to the new norm, whatever the new normal is, it's not going to be the world we knew 2.5 years ago, but as we get back to the new normal, whatever that is, that a lot of these supply chain issues and bottlenecks will be addressed. I would also suggest to you that perhaps lessons were learned by our friends in the processing industry, the packers, whether it's animal protein or vegetables or whatever, making sure that their staffs have safe working conditions, and those who want to be vaccinated have access early to preventative vaccines will help keep the system working. We are also discussing how do you address the smaller and intermediate processors. The mention was made of a state-inspected meat processing facility. In the United States, you have two kinds of inspection. You have USDA, an inspector physically in the building examining the product, whatever it may be, livestock, or you have state-inspected. For the record, state-inspected meat is just as safe as any federally inspected meat. The only difference is you can't move a state-inspected product across a state line. It has to be federally inspected. So we're having a discussion about how do you make either more federal inspectors available, and that means hiring and training people, and those processors have to pay a fee for those inspectors to be in the building, or how do you give states more flexibility? That's just one of the many issues we'll have to sort through this fall and spring.
Perfect. Thank you. This question comes from Jessica Diedrich of Hunger Free Oklahoma, and she asks, what do you, Congressman Lucas, see as the most contentious aspects of the 2023 Farm Bill?
How do I persuade the people I serve with in Congress who have such dramatically different philosophical views of the world to come together to achieve that consensus to pass another document? What do I mean by that? Some of my more liberal friends are very hesitant about spending money on the non-nutrition side of the Farm Bill, providing money for conservation or crop insurance or research that benefits, quote, wealthy landowners. But some of my friends on the right have just the same problem, only it's magnified. They don't want to spend money on anybody on any occasion for any reason. How do we enlighten both camps to understand that we're attached at the hip, that the future of the country depends on this comprehensive program? I alluded earlier in my comments about how farm bills had started out as raising food, and then they'd become farm bills in nutrition, and then they'd become farm bills in nutrition and conservation. Building that broad coalition of support. Lion's share of the money, in all fairness, goes to the nutrition side of the Farm Bill agenda now. It's overwhelmingly. But that's where the need is. But it is the need from both sides that creates the coalition. One of my most frustrating moments in the 12 that became the 13 that became the 14 Farm Bill when I was chairman, and it shouldn't take 2.5 years just to make sure we all have enough to eat. It shouldn't take 2.5 years legislatively. But my own leadership determined that maybe they weren't so enthusiastic about farm bills. So when the bill came to the floor, it came under something called an open rule. When you have 435 of mildly opinionated, mildly vocal people in one room, unlike the Senate, you can't have unlimited debate. You've got to have time, you've got to have limits, you've got to be able to focus to get to a conclusion. Most bills are passed under what is called a rule. So many amendments, so much debate time to make it all come to a conclusion. When I brought the Farm Bill to the floor the first time, my leadership determined that we should consider it under an open rule. In some places, they would say they were loving on me a little bit. That's sarcastic, so you can ignore it. But I had 125 amendments offered. 125 amendments I had to dig my way through. And I finally got to the point where in the course of the process, we achieved a bill, a comprehensive bill that a majority of my colleagues, not necessarily at the extremes, but a majority of my colleagues would support. And then I spent the amendment process fighting off crazy things on both wings to hold that group in the middle together. That once again will be our challenge. Now, whether the chairman of the Ag Committee next year will be David Scott of Georgia or G.T. Thompson of Pennsylvania, and being the most senior Republican, I'll be sitting at Mr. Thompson's elbow, we'll have those same challenges. But that's why we have to do good legislative work based on good input, and why we have to have people across the country who will help drive the membership. Because remember, most of my colleagues are really wonderful human beings. They want to do the right thing. The problem is, there's so many things going on, and they're from such unique parts of the country with a different perspective, they don't know what the right thing is. That's what we'll all spend the next year together doing, is making sure my colleagues, some of your fellow members of Congress, know what the right thing is. Building that consensus in otherwise a very diverse and rancorous world. I'm considered to be one of the boring members because I focus on issues. I focus on getting things done. You won't see me on late night television, but that's okay. I'm here to make sure the mistakes that created the Great Depression don't occur in my district again. I'm here to make sure that the recession of 1982 that wiped out my fellow college graduates from Oklahoma State, we don't do that again. I'm here to make sure that we focus in a civil fashion to do the things that have to be done for the common good. It's not been that long ago that we had rickets and scurvy and every other form of malnutrition all over this great country. We've come a long ways. Short answer, achieving consensus amongst the majority of my colleagues so we can continue to move forward. That's the challenge.
Thank you. This next question comes from Excaret Nunez from KOSU Radio. What can be added to the Farm Bill to protect Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers from the damaging effects of drought similar to the ones they experienced this past summer?
Mother Nature is an interesting entity, effect, I should say. In the existing Farm Bill, we have language to help make sure crops are produced. We can't make it rain, but in the Farm Bill, we have drought insurance to address a failure of your wheat crop or your corn crop. Or we have programs to deal with if it doesn't rain enough and you don't have the pasture to raise your cattle or your sheep, your whatever. The difference between the 14 Farm Bill and 18 Farm Bill and the 23 Farm Bill and previous Farm Bills is it's all voluntary. There's nothing mandatory. And there's no production controls. There's no quotas, no allotments, no restrictions on what you can raise. But the tools are there. Now, sometimes the cynics will say farmers farm for crop insurance. They don't understand the programs. You pay that premium and you hope that you have good weather and you don't have to deal with the drought. But you pay that premium so that that crop insurance in a drought situation will help you get the next crop in the ground. It won't make you whole. It won't make you a profit. It will help you put the seed in the ground one more time. I always tell people, I don't pay my life insurance so my wife can have a pool boy. I pay my life insurance so my wife can stay on the farm if she wants to. That's what crop insurance, and these programs have gotten stronger through the years. But if you have a stable production base, you're more likely to have stable production and stable prices and avoid food shortages and shocks. And we've lived through some of those in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Taylor Sanchez Guzman from the Regional Food Bank. What are policymakers hoping to achieve with the upcoming version of the Farm Bill in creating a sustainable future for U.S. agriculture, specifically regarding land loss and increasing accessibility for future generations in farming?
That's a challenge. In farm bills for at least the last 30 years, we've tried to address programs for young or beginning farmers. And you don't have to be young to be a beginning farmer. I've seen folks in their 50s and 60s working really hard to try to retire from another career to utilize an asset or create one. Those programs are a challenge. The long-term land use, that's actually a combination of federal policy and state policy. Because we have right now a great debate in Oklahoma and across the country over foreign land ownership. That's traditionally not been a part of federal statute, but it's been part of state laws. By the way, it's against the law in Oklahoma to own farmland if you're a foreigner. It just is. The federal government has a system of tracking who owns, and we're trying to address making that more public so my friends at the state level can make better decisions about these issues. But the future of farming is a challenge because in production agriculture, we are, or should I say my constituents, however you want to word it, are some of the most aggressive adopters of new technology. My grandfathers walked behind a horse when they plowed. My father had a great old tractor with an umbrella on top of it. Nowadays, if you go into wheat country, if you don't climb up 2 sets of stairs to get in the cab, they don't use them in the Great Plains in western Kansas and eastern Colorado. How we balance that technology with the interest of the family farm, that's one of the ongoing struggles, because I don't ever want to give up that unique characteristic that makes us in many ways different than the rest of the world.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Adrian Elder from the Public Health Institute of Oklahoma. Could an emergency referral from a qualified personnel, i.e. first responder, school resource officer, designated social workers, could they temporarily remove restrictions for families to qualify for benefits, and if so, how long?
You've asked me one of those what-if questions. I don't see any reason that it's not possible. I don't know the answer under existing law whether it could be done, and I'm not sure. That's just one of those things that would take under advisement. But I see where the point's coming from.
Okay, perfect.
Address the needs.
All right, and next we have a question from Megan Palmer from Elk City Help Incorporated. How will this bill impact not only the farmers in rural counties, but also food pantries in the same counties who have fewer resources than larger communities?
By making the TFAP resources available and by working together at events like this to educate the public about what is available and what opportunities should be developed. We discussed earlier, James and Gina and I, that we have a twice-a-week food closet, we call it, in Cheyenne, Oklahoma. And I'm always impressed by the people lined up. It's typically after work, the people who are lined up. I don't think my neighbors fully understand that. The need is there. So a short answer is we build off of the successes we've had. We continue to expand TFAB. We get the word out there. And honestly, the food bank movement is one of the parts of the nutrition puzzle that have helped me personally in getting some of my more conservative friends to understand why this is important. Because the stereotype coffee shop comment is, you're giving people stamps, and now you're giving these little plastic cards, and you don't know what they're doing. Why, they ought to be getting food. Well, what are you doing? You're meeting that need. Many of my colleagues are still focused back on the days of the old supply control programs when you had these warehouses of product, high-quality product, bought up and stored. We don't have that, which is why we have to have TFAP to go make purchases.
Both Ginger and Jenna spoke to us tonight about food deserts, and this question also asks about food deserts, and it's from Melissa Griaggio from Unite Us, Lawton Farmers Market, and the Hungry Hearts Feeding Ministry. Her question is, what is the direct impact that the Farm Bill will have on food deserts, specifically on rural populations?
We'll see what the next iteration in 2023 does. And it's a challenging equation because you can't, if there's not enough population base in some of my rural areas to support a retail facility, you can't create something that the community is not able to support. I have lots of communities now that are small enough, size-wise, that it is a struggle. But in addition to nutrition, there are several other issues here, especially from the retail food provider side. You're a big sales tax supporter of the community. If you don't, my community doesn't have at least one grocery store or some facility selling a reasonable amount of groceries, they're having a hard time hiring a night watchman. They're having a hard time having 2 people to work on the trash truck. I mean, it just is what it is. And I know there's lots of discussion in the legislature about this issue, but it's an important tax base. So we'll work together on it.
Perfect. Another question from Excaret Nunez from KOSU Radio. What priorities have you discussed with the U.S. House Agriculture Committees for the Farm Bill in 2023?
Number one, we have to have another farm bill because it's never certain. We have to have another farm bill. And number two, we have to continue to make the investments in rural America. Think about research and rural development. Think about the things that raise the food, but also in our fellow citizens, the nutrition needs. Trying to get across to my colleagues that this is a process that has evolved since the 1930s, that there is a reason that every section of that bill is in there, and that when people come to us, as we've discussed this evening, about improving, enhancing, tweaking, making adjustments, when people come to us, there's a reason to make the adjustment. Now, there's one other issue that goes along with the legislative process. That's the budget and appropriations process. We have a unified budget. There's so much money allocated every year to do the things we do. Making sure that nutrition and the Farm Bill secure its fair share, because as you know, in everything you do, inflation is a monstrous thing to deal with this time. Making sure we have the dollars to work with to do the right policies. Again, some of my friends on the right look at the nutrition programs as an easy cash cow. Other people look at the crop insurance side of the equation. I simply remind them it all goes together.
Well, that's a great segue into this next question, also from Excaret Nunez from KOSU Radio. She asks, how can you ensure crop insurance is preserved in the Farm Bill in 2023?
It is a challenge. It is a challenge on the farmer side of the equation, on the commodity title side. There's always this ongoing debate about should the resources follow the production, or should the resources be allocated to determine who the farmers are and how they farm. I'm not a person who believes that the Farm Bill should be used to define what a farm is and what we raise. I think the market, the demand of your guests, your customers, will determine what we should be providing, and farmers will react to that. and I should work to help with them resources to be able to respond to what your requests are from your customers, from your consumers. But it's an ongoing struggle. It's just an ongoing struggle. And if you hadn't noticed, there is a tendency occasionally in Congress on both sides of the room to want to tell everybody how to do everything. That is not the way things should work.
Okay, our first question from the live audience tonight. This question asks, since the implementation of the Farm Bill, what do you believe have been the biggest achievements that we cannot afford to lose ground on?
Setting COVID aside and the disruption of processing and the distribution systems, the fact that we've had relatively stable years out on the farm, stable in holding our farmer base together, the ability to overcome some really interesting weather patterns. It's helped us cope with challenges I don't think that anyone would have thought 10 or 20 years ago. And I will tell you, I've been plowing the same wheat field since 1977. It's harder to farm with the weather patterns we're in now. It just is. Now, is that global industrial activity? I suspect. But I know where emissions are going down, and it's in the United States in the last 20 years. We put less stuff in the air, but there are places around the world where they've dramatically expanded their emissions, and we're dealing with all of that.
Okay, one last question.
Oh, my
This
goodness.
comes from Taylor Sanchez Guzman of the Regional Food Bank. Can you speak to how inflation factors into funding allocations in the bill, or what additional protections can be added to the bill to protect rural communities and food insecure families?
I would suggest to you that it probably is difficult to do some kind of automatic indexing on the funds. You see, the Farm Bill is set up so that we pass a Farm Bill approximately every 5 years in my tenure. Much of the money is mandatory. It's automatic over the life of the Farm Bill. The rest of it is appropriated. So every year you have an appropriations bill that comes in and makes adjustments in the monies allocated. So it's not just the Ag Committee, the United States House working hard for us and with us. It's also making sure the Appropriations Committee members every year when they do the funding bills also address these issues. Again, it's a team sport of working together. As far as this coming Farm Bill, I would suggest to you that the need is blatant and it's obvious, and that should make it easier to address. I look forward to the time when we get to fully to the new normal, when the health issues are addressed. It would be nice to have some peace break out in certain places around the world, stability in a variety of things here. I tell my staff, I almost have an obligation to be a member of Congress until we get to where it's boring again. Because you really want boring, whether you know it or not. You want a boring, stable, consistent world where people can live up to their potential, where they have the resources they need. Boring. Give me boring. This excitement's overrated.
Thank you, Congressman Lucas. You have been so generous with your time and your transparency to help us understand the impact of the food bill, but also, or the Farm Bill, but also the opportunities that lie in 2023. So I'm going to turn it back to Stacy to close this out, but if you have any final comments.
Just one thought I would say. When I was in the legislature before I went to Congress, one of the old members in Southwest Oklahoma, an upperclassman, pointed out to me, and I've alluded to this earlier indirectly, the legislature, he said, was a cross-section of Oklahoma, and I believe that fully. I think the same thing could be said about the United States House of Representatives. We're a cross-section of America. He said 95% of the people are wonderful. They're folks that you'd want to take care of your widowed mother, your orphan children. You trust them with everything you had. You'd want them to come over on Sunday afternoon to visit. But he said there's about 5% that you wonder where they came from. His exact phrase was, what rock they crawled out from under. But they're the ones the TV cameras follow around. They're the one the TV cameras follow around. So remember, whether it's the legislature, I believe, or Congress, most of my colleagues want to do the right thing for the right reason. We just have to work together to make sure they know what the right thing is, and we have to give them the right reasons to enable them to do that. And that requires all of us working together. Whether it's my nervousness about conservation or our nervousness about meeting the nutritional needs of America, we have to work together. And that's, again, thank you for enabling me to be a part of this town hall process tonight. And by the way, I do 32 of them a year. If you are bored beyond tears, come to one of my town meetings on general subjects. You'll be amazed at what we discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of you that have joined us, both here in person and also virtually, to Congressman Lucas and to our amazing panel. We've learned so much tonight, and I think for me, what I was just reminded of is, food is foundational, and the Farm Bill plays such an important role not only in our neighbors that are facing food insecurity, but for all of us, because it provides that stable support that the people that are producing our food need to make sure we all have access to it. So I hope that we all remember that as we move forward and continue to provide the support and the ideas to Congressman Lucas and all of our other elected officials to make sure that we take care of those that are taking care of us. So with that, I will say the town hall is adjourned. And again, we thank you all so much for your time. And if you're here, take some food from Hope's Kitchen on your way out, please. Thank you.